Okay, this is the my homemade wine making video. I actually had to make a video on this because it's a little more complicated than following a recipe. Anyways, you want to buy a home brew kit. Beer kits are usually better than the wine kits, believe it or not, for making wine. You can get this one off of Amazon. Comes with a bucket, a little spout that you'll probably never really use. Comes with a lid. It has a hole in it for the airlock, which is this thing here, which you'll fill with water. It goes in the hole and allows the gases to escape when the wine's fermenting and keeps out contaminants as well at the same time. It comes with some accessories, so it really helps you get off the ground for cheap. There are some additional things you will need to buy. You can find that right here on Amazon. I think you can see that. That's the name of it. That's the one I bought. Comes with a 6-gallon carboy, which is nice to have. You'll need one of those down the road. I believe a siphon, and I'm not sure what else, but we'll go over the other stuff. Okay, so once you get your kit, you're going to need some additional things. I highly recommend getting at least 6 of these growlers. They're 1 gallons. Much easier to pour out of a 1 gallon than trying to bottle up 30 bottles of wine out of this 6 gallons. Of course, the carboy, this you'll get into later when you start getting a little more creative and need to clear out your wines a little bit more. You're going to transfer from this to another one, then back and forth until you get the clarity of the wine you desire. We're also going to use a substance called bentonite clay to help with that clarity. I'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, an additional thing you'll need is this thing here. It's called a degasser. It goes in your drill, it spins around, and it breaks up the carbonation bubbles created from the fermentation so you don't end up drinking champagne. You'll want a bottle brush. This goes inside the carboy so that you can wash it out, get the sediment and stuff out of there. And then this is really optional. You can use your degasser to actually mix the ingredients to start with, but this actually works better because it also aerates the fluid, which helps the yeast take off. It's just a drywall stir stick for about $8 from Menards. It's all metal. It fits in your drill too, and it works really great. Okay, some additional things you'll want to pick up. I'll get to the recipe in a second. These are on the recipe. You'll want some acid blend, controls the pH of the wine, helps it ferment properly. Some grape tannins, it's kind of a brown powdery looking stuff. And here's the bentonite clay we're talking about. You use this one bag here would last you probably for years. You use such a little amount. You want to pick up some yeast nutrient that helps the yeast take off and multiply better and faster. Make sure your kit, when you order it, which I believe it does, comes with a hydrometer. The hydrometer is a very important piece of equipment, and I'll show you how we use that in a minute. This is going to let you know the alcohol content of your wine. You will also probably want to pick up a siphon if it does not come with the kit. I think the kit there we saw does. And you want to pick up some Camden tablets, which are basically preservatives. These will actually stop the yeast from breeding. It won't stop the yeast from eating, but it'll stop them from breeding. So that should stop the fermentation of your wine, or actually just slow it down to the point where it's almost insignificant. Those are just additives, or I can't think of the name right now. And of course you'll need 6 gallons of wine. Preservatives. The Camden pills are preservatives, and that's what you don't want in your wine. So when you go to buy your wine, even though it says 100% natural or grape juice or whatever on it, flip it over and read the label and make sure there's nothing in it but juice from concentrate, absorbic acid, and natural flavorings. Anything else, avoid it, especially if it's preservatives, because the preservatives will kill your yeast instantly. Okay, speaking of yeast, There's many types of yeast out there for different kinds of wines. These two right here are essentially about the same. You have EC1118 and K1V1116. Either one will work. They're very popular. You can find them in most brew stores. They're very cheap, usually 50 cents to $1 a packet. And here we have the recipe. And I'm going to show you how this all goes together, because you do not want to add the yeast until the very end. In fact, the yeast won't even be added until I'm sorry, it'll be added at the very end. Just want to make sure of that. Okay, I will go over what this stuff is if you can't read my writing. Alright, so now we're going to move on, and I think at this point I've covered everything you need. You will definitely want to pick up some sugar as well. You're going to need some sugar. Okay, we're going to get started making it now. Okay, so we're going to start with the recipe, and I'm just going to kind of go down the list with the exception of the yeast. That will be the last thing we add. So we're going to start with the 4.5 teaspoons of acid blend. And there's 3 teaspoons to a tablespoon. So we're going to get 1 tablespoon and 1 teaspoon of acid blend. You can do it either way though. Pause. Yes, pause. Okay, next on the list is the juice, but we're going to actually add that second to last, so we're going to skip over that now. I'm going to go into the sugar next. I just know this from experience that 6 cups of sugar with Concord grape will always get you where you need to be with a hydrometer. We'll get into that in a minute, but if we need more sugar, we'll just add as needed. 6 cups of sugar. I'm doing 2 cups at a time. Now if you make apple wine or some other kinds of wine, you will need more sugar, because there's less sugar in apples than there are grapes. But the hydrometer will let us know what we need. Okay, coming back to the recipe, we're going to put as I said before, the yeast will go in last and the juice second to last. Now we'll go down 2 tablespoons of yeast nutrient. Okay. Okay, next on the list is 2 tablespoons of grape tannin. Be careful with this, it's real fine powder, like talcum powder, and don't want to get it up your nose or down your throat or anything. It's kind of real stinky. Okay. Next on the list is a 1/2 teaspoon of bentonite clay. Okay, so we're going to take this clay and our 1/2 teaspoon. Takes a very little amount. And we're going to put it in our measuring cup that we used for the sugar. And then we're going to use a wire whisk to stir this with. So to do this with the bentonite clay, you want to run your water as hot as it will go. The hotter the water, the better it dissolves. You could even use a tea kettle if you wanted, but that's probably a little extreme. As you can see, there's very little bit of bentonite clay in there. I'm going to wait for this water to warm up. Getting there now. And we're going to also want to use a wire whisk. This is going to help the clay break up and dissolve into the water much better. There will be some residue left, but that's okay. That'll fall to the bottom, and that'll be siphoned out at the very end of the making process. Okay, it feels like my water's scalding hot, so what we're going to do is just eyeball it. Just going to put a little bit in there, about like so. Maybe half a cup. Okay, and then just take your wire whisk, and I like to twirl it between my hands like this. Kind of make a blender motion. You're going to get that clay really stirred up and moving. And you might be able to see on the bottom there's still some that's not dissolved. That's okay, don't worry about it. Okay, so we're going to do that for about a minute, 30 seconds to a minute or so. We'll come back and do it one more time before we use it. We'll just let that set there. Okay, now we're ready to add the juice. So I have a mix here of Concord grape, red grape, and the Sangria mix, which is all red, basically berries or grapes. So these tannins, these grape tannins that I put into that brown powder will really bring out the flavors in these. Again, if I were making a white wine, I would not use the grape tannins. But anyways, we can get to that later. You can ask me about that later down the road. I'm just helping you with this grape wine for now. So as you can see, I have a lot of these half gallons to add. So I'm just going to add the first one here, and then I'll come back and when I got them all poured into the bucket, just pour it right on in there. And we'll get all 6 gallons in there, and then I'll come back and pick up from there once they're in there. Okay, so we're back. I'm now adding the last bottle of juice. As you can see on top of the bucket there's a foamy, a bunch of foam. That foam is what they call must, M-U-S-T, will look like once you put the yeast in there. The yeast will go in, you won't see anything for about 24 hours. Within about 24 hours you'll see some light foaming, probably around the edges of the bucket, and then it will start to bubble up. Not quite this high, it could, but you'll see this foam on there. That's a good sign. That means your yeast is working and you're underway. Okay, so we got all of our juice added. So let's go back to the list. So we've added everything on the list at this point. The juice second to last, and then we're going to hold off on the yeast still yet because we need to mix this up first. Okay, so next up we're going to mix this. Okay, so I got my drywall stir stick into my drill here. Simple old drill. And we're going to start out easy. We don't want to make a mess. And we're just going to stir this all up really good. About a good minute or so. Not only do you want the ingredients mixed well, but you also want it aerated. The aeration will help the yeast take off better. Kind of be careful you don't make too much of a mess because this will splatter. Can't go too fast with it this full or just go right over the top. Alright, so that's about all there is to the mixing. Okay, then I'll take my stir stick off. I do it under the fluid so it doesn't splatter all over the place. Okay, so we have the bentonite clay left that we haven't added yet. I forgot about that. Okay, so we're going to just stir this one more time, kind of mix it up. Don't have to get too involved with it. Bring it on over, and we're going to pour it right in here into our solution. Okay, this should have been put in before I stirred, but I forgot. So what we'll do is we'll just take our stir stick by hand here, and we can just kind of stir it in. This isn't so important to be stirred in because once the wine ferments, the carbonation bubbles will carry the clay to the top of the solution and actually grab particles, stuff you really don't want in your wine, and drop it to the bottom of the bucket. So it doesn't have to be that mixed in all that well. The fermentation process will take care of that itself. Okay, one additional thing you'll want to pick up is a pair of pantyhose, believe it or not. And what you're going to do is cut the legs off at the crotch level, maybe leave a little bit, and then you're going to stretch it and tie those into knots. And you're going to use the bigger part of the pantyhose to cover the bucket with. For the first 2 days of fermentation, we're not going to use the lid because it will it'll prevent oxygen from reaching the yeast, and the yeast won't work as well. We're going to use pantyhose. Pantyhose allows the oxygen to pass through and keeps bugs and dust and other contaminants out of your wine. Actually, there's different phases of fermentation. In the first phase, they say you don't even really ever have to even cover your wine, but we will, because I find it works very good. Alright, I'm just going to pick one of these yeasts. Didn't really matter which one, because like I said before, they're pretty much the same. See that foam on the top? That's good. That's air into the solution. That's going to help this yeast. And what we want to do is take this yeast and just kind of sprinkle it over the entire surface of the wine. Now I'm going to stop here because I got a little ahead of myself. What we forgot to do, I'm so used to not having to do this because grape wine always works out with the recipe. What we need to do is use our hydrometer to make sure that we're starting with the proper level of sugar. Okay, can you get a close-up on this? This is the hydrometer. It's got a bunch of numbers. I don't know if you can see those real well. Not looking like it. There's a bunch of numbers on here, decimal numbers especially. The bottom number is 0.99 at the top of the scale, and it goes up 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, so on, so forth, on up. And if you roll that around from the number here, you'll see a percentage, and that's the percentage of your alcohol, or potential of your alcohol. We haven't made any yet. So what you want to start your wine at usually is about 1.08. I'm sorry, it's not point, it's 0.8. I'm sorry, 0.8. You want to start your wine at 0.8. That's when you know you have enough sugar. Okay, so if I drop this into the solution, you're probably not going to be able to see this very well. And I let this hydrometer float. It'll float right about, just like I said, 1.8 right there. You can see where it stopped. 1.8. That means I have enough sugar in this wine to take off. You could be as low as 1.6, but you'll be adding sugar sooner, and it's really a pain in the butt to do. So you want to be at 1.8. That's a good starting point. Now again, if you brew this out of apple juice or other white kind of fruits, you're going to need to probably add more sugar. But 1.8. I should have checked this before I added the yeast. I got ahead of myself. So we add all these ingredients, we stir them up. We're going to use the hydrometer to make sure where we're at with the sugar. Now if I'm too low, if I'm at 1.5, this will sink deeper. I'll add another cup or two of sugar at a time until I get to 1.8. So add sugar until you get to 1.8. Then we'll add our yeast at the very end. I got ahead of myself on that. I apologize for that. Okay, so I'm going to pull this out, and I'm going to continue to spread this yeast in there. I usually don't use the hydrometer like I said with the grape wine because I don't need to. I know that 6 cups of sugar will always get me to 1.8, so I'm used to skipping that part, but I shouldn't have because that's important to know when you get into making other kinds of wines. Okay, so once again, that's pretty much it. This should take about 2 days and we'll see a must that looks similar to this on top of the bucket. Now, we're going to go back to those pantyhose. We're going to take these pantyhose and we're going to stretch them over the bucket. Very carefully. Try not to get the pantyhose into the wine. Sometimes it happens. Just make sure they're clean. Always wash them after every batch. Okay. And if you look around the outside edge, I try to make sure that the pantyhose stays above the lip so that no bugs can squeeze into my wine. So I just kind of do the other way around like so. This is kind of drooping here in the center, so I just kind of pick it up and lay it over. That happens sometimes. The wine's going to ferment up and might touch these pantyhose. That's okay. It won't hurt anything. At that point, that's when the lid will go on. And that'll be about 2 days. So we're going to let this set for 2 days until we see a must. I will come back with an updated video, show you the must, then we will cap it, use the airlock, air chamber, and then show you how to finish out this wine. One last thing before I go. Remember to keep this wine at 72 to 78 degrees. So a lot of people like to do this in their basement, but if your basement gets below 72 degrees, you may be sabotaging all your effort. I keep mine upstairs in the kitchen on a counter next to the stove because my house is always controlled between 72 and 78 degrees. So I just set it right up here, and I'll let that set where I can check it over the next day or two.